So welcome, and this session is sponsored by the Nunatsiavut government and the Nunatsiavut group of companies. So thank you to them for sponsoring this particular session. And the session is Northern Infrastructure, the Effects of Climate Change. Something that's very, very important, a very important topic. One that's actually very close to home for me, as I've done a lot of presentations on climate change in the past. I've done around 25 presentations across the country and internationally as well. That was more on raising awareness of climate change. This would have been in the late 2000s. There's not really a whole lot of that needs to be done anymore. We realize that it's here, and it does have a tremendous effect, not just on infrastructure, business, our lives. It has an effect on our home. And when I say our home, I just don't mean when I say I'm going home. I'm originally from Nova Scotia. When I say home, it means there. Now when I say home, it means in Causley. When I say home, I mean our home. And we only have one of those. And we all share that. And that home is our planet. And climate change is affecting that. And I'm really interested in hearing what our panelists have to say today. Format-wise, all our speakers are going to have about 15 minutes to speak. And at the end, we're going to have an opportunity for people to ask questions and have comments, and we'll get a discussion going for about another 15 minutes. And then that'll be it. You'll be adjourned you'll get recess if you're good. So our three panelists here today are Mr. Chris White on my far left, who is the Vice President of Federal Affairs Insurance Bureau of Canada, the IBC. In the center is the Honourable Darryl Shiwak, First Minister for the Nunatsiavut government. And on my far left, I think I might have mixed up my left and right there. On my far right, this side, is Mr. Devin, Causley, who is Manager of Climate Change Programs for the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. So welcome to all our panelists here today. A quick reminder for you, and this is a gentle reminder to put your mobile devices on either silent or buzz or something like that. And I mention that because I've done that before. As a moderator, I've had my phone on in my pocket before and it's rang and it was horrifying. So to save you from that embarrassment, there's a reminder for you. So without further ado, Mr. Chris White. Chris has over 20 years of experience in public and government relations and strategic communications planning in both public and private sectors. Prior to joining IBC, he worked as Chief of Staff for 5 federal cabinet ministers. His executive positions in the private sector included VP Government Relations and Public Affairs and VP Government Relations in the auto and finance industries. Having joined IBC in 2011 as VP Federal Affairs, he oversees the daily operations of IBC's office in Ottawa, directs the P&C insurance industry's strategic and government relations efforts in the nation's capital, in the nation's capital. Chris holds a master's degree in political science from the University of Windsor and an undergrad degree in political science and graduate diploma in international development from the University of Ottawa. He is also active with Special Olympics. So a warm welcome to Chris White, our first speaker.
Thank you, Jimmy. The fact that you can't tell left from right suggests why you're not a teacher anymore. It is cold here, so thank you for coming out this morning. And when Jimmy says that I oversee the Ottawa office of IBC, it means I oversee myself. Our head office is in Toronto, so we have about 200 people, but I am the Ottawa office, so it's not that tough a job. I'm just going to walk you through some slides that we've used across Canada for the last year and a half now, because as you can appreciate from the insurance sector, the whole issue of climate change and adaptation and mitigation has become a real issue for the industry. And it's a twofold issue, right? One is from a financial perspective and from an economics perspective, the industry is losing billions of dollars, so it's unsustainable. But from just a day-to-day policyholder's perspective, which we all are, it's untenable as well. So I'll walk you through where we are. I think you'd be surprised. I must say, frankly, up until about 2 years ago, I knew nothing about the insurance industry And the fact that they were doing as much as they are on mitigation and adaptation really surprised me. But it's intuitive when you think about it, that they need to be, and they need to do more, and they're looking for ways to be more innovative than they have been. But I think you might be pleasantly surprised that the industry is as responsive as it has been. I will qualify all of my comments, though, by saying that I, like everyone, thinks that my policies are too expensive. So I'm quite happy to see what the NDP have done in Ontario by reducing and putting the pressure on the Wynne government. I'm a former Liberal staffer, so the fact that I'm congratulating the NDP, I think, suggests that I have a stake in this as well. So thank you for the invitation, and I'll just take you through where we're at. The industry itself has realized that we need to do more. Sorry, this way, next. But before I get into sort of the essence of what we're doing, just to give you a context, the Insurance Bureau of Canada represents approximately 200 companies across Canada. So that's essentially every property and casualty insurer. The total assets of the industry represent about $146 billion, and our taxes paid at the federal and provincial level are about $7.5 billion. The taxes we pay helps us at the policy level because government always listens to people who pay a lot of money. And when you talk to officials at finance, particularly in Ottawa or at the provincial levels across government, it gives you extra credibility because they know that when you're paying that much money, not only does the government need it for all sorts of reasons, but they are prepared to listen. So given how much we pay and given the total assets, we do have a voice at the table. And then when we begin to take positions on issues that historically we haven't, government is quite intrigued by that. So we've developed very strong relationships with Natural Resources Canada, Environment Canada, certainly finance, but more importantly of late, Public Safety Canada, who have begun to do a lot of work on mitigation. And I think you'll see over the course of this year that public safety will take a lot more space than they have historically on these issues. For a few years, as the industry began to look at things that they needed to do and weren't necessarily doing particularly well, the one issue that came up time and time again was climate change. So about 6 years ago, the board of directors and the industry writ large indicated to IBC that you need to get a better handle on climate change. And as a consequence of that, as the policy work of IBC evolved, climate change or adaptation became one of the 4 main priorities of the industry. The reason for that was when you look at the payouts and what the industry has been paying out as a cost of climate change, it wasn't overly significant. I mean, you'll see the spike in 1998. For those of us who lived in Ottawa, and those of you who may have lived in Quebec at that time would recall that was from the ice storm. But those trends weren't too bad until you get into the last decade. And what you see there is that over the last 5 years, the payouts of insured losses owing to climate change or insured losses have now begun to be peaking at over $1 billion, which is a significant amount of money. But then, as I say to my young daughter, but then you had what happened just this past year, which was a payout of over $3 billion. So from the industry's perspective, that's untenable. So the cost of that was, as you would recall, the Alberta floods, the Toronto floods. And when you speak to people in Alberta, when they hear people in Toronto say what happened to them in the summer was a flood, they just shake their head and say, well, that wasn't really a flood. But if you're from Toronto, everything is bigger. And then you had the ice storm. So we released this press release last week calculating that the insured losses for 2013 were $3.2 billion. So you can appreciate why, if you're the head of a major company or head of any insurance company, that just is not tenable. That's just unsustainable, I should say. So increasingly, industry is looking for ways in which they can get a better handle on that and understand exactly what they're dealing with, because what people used to think was the norm is no longer the norm, but they just don't know what that looks like on a going forward basis. So one of the things we did was, and some of you may have heard of Dr. Gordon McBean. He's one of the world's leading climatologists, and he's a Nobel laureate, and he's a teacher, professor, I should say, at the University of University of Western Ontario. And what we had him do was we had him track and look at what the weather would look like in Canada for the next 40 years in every region of the country. And for those of you from the north, I'm not going to be sharing anything that you probably don't already know, but just some of the findings that his report provided. So the north has experienced the greatest warming in Canada over the past 40 to 50 years. That rate of warming has been among the greatest in the world. Unfortunately, that trend is expected to continue. Temperatures are expected to increase, I should say, by anywhere from 2 to 4 degrees between now and 2050. And the consequence of this, more snow or rain, precipitation is expected to increase by between 10 to 25%, with the largest increase in winter. Expectation from the study suggests that sea levels will rise upwards of 25 centimeters higher than they are today. And that, of course, would mean reduced ice cover and increased rate of coastal erosion. Wildfires, which have already increased and are a big cost to the industry, will increase as well. And the study suggests that they could increase in terms of the length of the season by upwards of 10 days per year by 2050. And that's the issue for all of us. Nobody really knows what they're dealing with on a going forward basis. And when you look at what's happening, somebody didn't listen to Jimmy. When you look at the issue of permafrost and the melting, what that means is you've got an issue that all governments at every level are really grappling with. But what's clear, and Obama said it in his State of the Union a couple nights ago, climate change is a fact. And I think what industry and business is really struggling with is trying to find that sweet spot with government, because from a federal perspective, which I know best, they just don't have the money that they really need to invest the way they should. At the same time, they're trying to make undertake mitigation efforts, which clearly are not keeping track with the realities that the country is facing. So clearly, when we talk to McBain and what his study has told us is we know that all parts of Canada are at risk. While we at IBC have not worked directly with northern governments on adaptation, it's clearly something that we want to do, and we are welcome any opportunity to do so. One of the challenges that IBC has historically had, certainly since before I joined, and just I think overall, is they haven't had a lot of really successful strategic partnerships. And one of the things that has been very important to me since I got there was to really solidify a working relationship with FCM. I mean, I'm a big fan of FCM, as I'm sure most of you are, for all the really great work that they do. And I think what was evident last year in the federal budget was I think there was no better spokesperson for the infrastructure deficit that affects all Canadians than FCM. And what they did was, as some of you may know, they pulled together a strong working coalition of a lot of various stakeholders under an infrastructure umbrella. And they did a really terrific job in terms of lobbying the government, bringing municipal officials to Ottawa, provincial officials to Ottawa, and doing what advocacy is designed to do, which is to effect strong and substantive public policy and do it in a way that's nonpartisan, but just makes eminent sense for all of us. So when we look at the work that they do, we're really pleased to be a partner with them. And one of the things that's significant for us is the infrastructure deficit, because a lot of the times when, and I'll speak to it shortly, but when you look at sewer issues, which are often the cause of flooding in homes, it's an infrastructure deficit. So FCM has paid the deficit at approximately $55 billion, which is an enormous amount of money for a government at a federal level that is struggling to get back into surplus, which they know they will, but that's a huge, huge investment for them to commit to at this point. And It's something that we continue to work on, and many other stakeholders do. So we have a strong partnership with FCM, and we're very pleased to have that. But we also know that one of the things that we need to do is not just tell government we need more money, but also tell government we also have some solutions. So one of the things that we've done in the last couple of years is develop this, it's called a Municipal Risk Assessment Tool. And it's pretty interesting. It was designed with engineers helping us basically look at a city, and we know, for example, that some cities are more prone to flooding and some areas within each city are more prone to flooding. And as a consequence of that, is there something that we can do to help predict? Because with limited infrastructure dollars, you can't ask government to do all things in every jurisdiction. But what you can do is say, if you're going to spend money in this region, spend it wisely. But then the city would say, well, we don't really have what we need in terms of evidence in terms of where to invest the dollars. So what the Municipal Risk Assessment Tool does is helps to identify exactly those areas within a region which are at risk. So it identifies, for example, where the infrastructure system is really old and quite decayed, where sewer systems are very susceptible, where insurance claims historically have mounted over the last number of years. So then what we do is we take all of that information and then we plot it. And what we provide the cities with are maps. So the red highlights the areas that are most at risk, and the green, not so much. But what the MRAT tool does is it plots it, so today, plots it for 2020, and then up to 2050. So you can see the evolution of how certain municipalities and certain regions within those municipalities increasingly over the next 36 years are increasingly at risk. And so far we've got 3 pilot projects underway. We've got one in Coquitlam, we've got one in Hamilton, and we've got one in St. John's. We've got other cities that are interested in working with us, and that's something that we are really pleased to do. And what's interesting too is the industry has spent upwards of a few $1 million at least on developing this tool. But what they've also agreed to do for the next 3 years as MRAT comes online and we work with other cities, the industry has offered to give the maps to the municipalities. So the industry has no proprietary ownership of the maps. So as I said, the 3 cities, Coquitlam, Fredericton, and Hamilton. Just going to quickly conclude. Thank you. We know from the perspective of the insurance sector, we have a problem. And as I alluded to at the outset, when an industry is paying out over $3 billion a year, that's just not tenable. The consequence, of course, is policy and premiums are going to rise. We also know, though, that government at all levels are really grappling with this issue. And it's incumbent upon all of us in the business environment to try and find ways in which you can go to government and say, here's something to consider, and here's our contribution, as opposed to sitting on the sidelines and carping at government. We think this is a good start. We certainly think we need to do more. And as I said, one of the things we'd certainly like to do is to try and find a way to work more closely with governments in the North. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is the Honourable Darryl Shiwak, First Minister for the Nunatsiavut government. Darryl was born in the community north of Northwest River. He was raised in the community of Rivulet and loves all elements of outdoor life, including fishing, hunting, and just being on the land. Mr. Shiwak graduated from high school in Rivulet and then went on to get a degree in education and physical education. He was taught all grades in the communities of Nain and Hopedale. He's very passionately involved with youth activities and enjoys volunteering his time and being a role model for youth in his community. After leaving the teaching profession, Mr. Shiwak worked in the tourism industry at the community level and then went on to work in recreation. He's worked for the Voices Bay Nickel Company as a rec coordinator on site in Northern Labrador for almost 2 years. Mr. Shiwak has always been concerned about the welfare of his hometown of Riglet and all the communities in Nunatsiavut. After serving on the local community council, he ran for a seat on the newly established Nunatsiavut government. The former Minister of Education and Economic Development was re-elected as ordinary member for Riglet on May 4th and subsequently appointed as First Minister. Mr. Shiwak is also currently the Acting Minister of Lands and Natural Resources. Big welcome, First Minister.
Thank you, Jimmy. I get really nervous when I'm doing public speaking, and one thing Bert was the guy to scale up here. He always said, if you're nervous, pretend everybody's naked. But Bert is in the front row, so I won't be doing that. I'd like to thank everybody for taking the time to come out and listen to the presentation, and thank the organizers for inviting me to present here at the presentation on northern infrastructure and climate change. Living in the north, we see climate change happening fairly fast, and it's no doubt is happening in our region, and in Nunatsiavut. And in many ways, you find that Nunatsiavut is a bellwether for climate change. We see some of the strongest, some of the earliest effects of climate change within our region, and it's extremely important for us as policymakers to address this issue and better equip the Inuit of the North to respond to the changes. Today I'm going to talk about three issues, or have three questions that need to be answered. What changes are occurring in Nunatsiavut? How are communities affected by these changes? And what positive steps are we taking to address these issues? A little bit of background. Nunatsiavut, when translated into English, means our beautiful land. It's consisted of 5 Inuit communities: Nain, Hopedale, Postville, Makhovik, and Riglet. Our land claims came into effect in December 1st, 2005. Since then, we formed the Nunatsiavut government. We've gone through a rapid growth and transition period. We're still growing rapidly. Communities are growing rapidly. And we see many effects in the communities that need to be addressed, and we're working diligently to achieve this. What I'm going to talk about today is sea ice. When we think of climate change and sea ice loss, usually the Canadian public think of the high north, and everything is well publicized there. But through Statistics Canada, in the 2011 report, they reported that there was a 73% sea ice loss within our region, Northern Labrador. This is the highest of any region in Canada. We refer to ourselves as Sikinik, which means people of the sea ice. This is because sea ice for us is used for harvesting, traveling, getting wood, and it's part of our Inuit way of life. For us, sea ice is critical infrastructure, and we as political and policy makers need to address this and accept this reality. And as well as the trend of sea ice loss, there's other trends happening within Nunatsiavut. One of them is extreme weather events. In the year 2009, 2010, we have an event we call an extreme winter event. During that year, there were major rain on snow days. For a period of 3 days in February, we have 3 inches of rain falling in our region. There's also a number of days in December, January, February where the temperature was above zero. There is also a lot of fog days in our region, and sea ice thickness decreased dramatically. To put that in perspective, this year we have a more normal winter. We have minus 30, minus 40, with the wind chill minus 50 degrees. This extreme weather is a rare event, but even so, during this winter, we have events happening where it might be minus 30, minus 40, minus 50 one day, and you wake up the next day, it's plus 1. And the next day is down to minus 30, minus 40 again. So it is happening. If you apply this to some of the communities and how this is affecting the communities, for the community of Nain, in the same year of 2009, 2010, and you can apply this to all the communities in Nunatsiavut, is that year, because of the extreme winter, 1/5 of the people who normally harvest seal and caribou were unable to do so that year. Of 2 people couldn't use the regular hunting and travel routes. 3 out of 4 people were unable to predict sea ice conditions. 7 out of 10 people were scared to go on the ice. Just under 1 of 10 people fell through the sea ice. Now, to think about that, the Inuit live on the ice, and they were scared to go on the ice. There was major in-community flooding in homes. People spent more on wood because they had to change their travel routes. Key communications towers were knocked out because of the extreme weather. Planes couldn't land into the community of Nain for 13 days straight. Nain and the rest of the communities are isolated, so we fly in and fly out. What are the projected changes for the future? Nobody knows. People can say they can predict climate change. We can't. We don't know what's going to happen. But given the nature of these impacts, it's important that we respond and adapt to climate change, including impacts on infrastructure in a holistic way, and otherwise solutions will never be sustainable. Climate change and infrastructure. When you look at the definition of infrastructure, it says physical components of interrelated systems providing commodities and services essential to enable, sustain, and enhance societal living conditions. If you give that definition, sea ice is infrastructure. In Nunatsiavut and across the Arctic, sea ice provides vital infrastructure for food security, mental health, and well-being and culture in many other areas. As stated before, we are the people of the sea ice. In the north, sea ice is critical, and I cannot stress this enough. This has to be acknowledged by governments and industry. Not only is sea ice critical infrastructure, it is directly linked to the sustainability and the key infrastructure systems such as housing. As one example, 55% of the homes in Nunatsiavut burn wood for heat. Travel across the sea ice allows us to harvest wood to heat our homes. With increased climate variability and change and unpredictable sea ice conditions, access to wood has become less reliable, leading to inadequately heated homes, high occurrences of mold, and subsequent housing damage. According to preliminary results of a housing needs assessment completed in Nunatsiavut, 44% of homes are inadequately heated. As well, 44% of homes have mold. This is highest in all of the Inuit regions across Canada. Sea ice provides an essential foundation which other infrastructure systems, such as food systems and energy systems, are built. All of these systems are mutually independent. So what does this mean? And I guess you're asking, what are we doing? One of the things we're doing is something called Smart Ice. Developed in response to the need to improve ice safety, Smart Ice is a community, government, academic, industry collaboration that integrates adaptive technology, remote sensing, and Inuit knowledge to promote safe travel in northern coastal communities. It is a sea ice classification system that incorporates traditional Inuit knowledge and complements the international ice classification standards, providing real-time information at a scale of relevance to community and decision-making. I would like to acknowledge a lot of our partners in this initiative, including Dr. Trevor Bell of Memorial University and all of the other people working with Trevor in our government. There are 3 main components of Smart Ice. The first is a network of stationary mobile devices that allows measurements of sea ice properties to be transmitted to a central server. The second repeats satellite imagery over the region from both standard sea ice surface conditions to Inuit-defined sea ice classes. They are identified. We will use radar imagery to generate sea ice classification that integrates Inuit knowledge with standard classification approaches. The third element, information technology that integrates in situ and remotely sensed data to generate digital products that are classified in accordance with the needs of the user groups. The increased unpredictability of sea ice in recent years, coupled with the importance of ice for us as a people, and the increased use of northern shipping routes by industry, create an immediate need for safety improvements and monitoring. Smart ice will enable Inuit to better prepare for future resource development in the context of changing climatic conditions by supporting safe sea ice travel. Increasing the use of northern ship routes are inevitable, and it is important that we are prepared. The Sustainable Communities Initiative. In an attempt to adapt changing climatic and environmental conditions, Nunatsiavut government has undertaken an ambitious initiative aimed at addressing issues related to housing, community planning, development, transportation, emergency services, energy security, water security, food security, community infrastructure, and air quality, among other things. One component of the Sustainable Community Initiative builds on existing knowledge of the current housing situation in our communities. It forges new housing directions that are adapted to changing climatic realities, addressing Inuit housing needs and preferences, investing in infrastructure integrity for the future. Northern housing is a complex issue that might have been solved decades ago if it were merely an engineering challenge. The strategy does not look at individual challenges in isolation, nor does it invest money or resources on single issues. Instead, it recognizes the interdependence of issues related to housing, including land use planning, water and energy security, mental health and youth training opportunities, and it tackles them concurrently. Over the last 2 years, we have established a baseline understanding of housing needs in Nunatsiavut, drawing together Labrador Inuit knowledge and the findings from both professional assessments and the comprehensive literature reviews. I'd like to acknowledge the support of both the federal and provincial governments are working with us to complete a housing needs assessment in our communities. This assessment will address current and future housing needs. This past December, the Sustainable Communities Initiative was one of 3 recipients of the prestigious Arctic Inspiration Prize. Many of you may have heard Tom Pegg talk about that last night at the opening ceremonies. And this is awarded by the SNA Inspiration Foundation. Now, I see Honourable was here in the room just now, so we'd like a big thank you to him for that award. This reward provided $350,000 for our housing project. With the support of this prize, we plan to build and monitor the Nunatsiavut's first sustainable multi-resident dwelling through the design and construction of culturally relevant, affordable, energy-efficient, climate-adapting housing. We will slow the rapid pace of infrastructure deterioration and currently experienced in the region, reduce the burden of overcrowding and mold, and by extension contribute positively to the mental and physical health and well-being of residents. Healthy homes are inextricably linked to healthy communities. Digital information system. A third program addressing the impacts of climate change and variability, change in community planning infrastructure is our DISC program, or Digital Information System for Communities. Climate change may be impacting land suitability as a result of the effects of thawing, permafrost on land stability, or changing precipitation and snow melt patterns, exceeding community drainage capacity. These effects are occurring within the context where available building space is already increasingly constrained by a combination of landscape hazards. Restricted areas and ground is unsuitable for development. We hope to address this issue through the production and planning of constraint maps that identify available suitable areas for development across range land uses under current and projected future climate states. The DISC project will provide each Nunatsiavut community with the training needed to access and update their digital database to support local decision making, sustainable planning, informed by knowledge of changing climate and environment. So what does all this mean? We don't know what the future holds for Nunatsiavut. We don't know, we're obviously not addressing everything, but we are willing to embrace new technologies and practices, yet are more keenly aware than others that change within Nunatsiavut requires acknowledging reality, careful planning, and great attention to how our way of life and environment will be affected. The promotion of safe sea ice travel throughout the region by providing community members with the tools they need to adapt to rapid change, the development of highly responsive, life-saving research and rescue operations, the expansion of more reliable telecommunications, infrastructure within Nunatsiavut are keys to helping us to adapt to climate change. The number of ships sailing along our coast is on the rise. We will continue to increase as northern shipping routes are developed and expanded. That is why it's extremely important that we promote the development and enhancement of marine infrastructure in our communities. At the same time, we have to ensure that proper mechanism, rules, and technologies are put in place to reduce the chances of marine disasters. A disaster along the Nunatsiavut coast will be devastating to our people and our way of life. Before I conclude, I think it's incredibly important that steps be taken now to minimize the negative effects of climate change is having on infrastructure systems within Nunatsiavut and our communities and across the north. There needs to be a firm commitment on part of all governments, as well as private interests, including industry, to make the necessary investments to protect the future of our communities and our way of life. Nothing.
Thank you, First Minister Shiwak. I urge you to start thinking about questions and comments, and after our next speaker, we're going to open up the mic for you. Our next speaker, Mr. Devin Causley, Manager of Climate Change Programs for FCM. Devin joined the Federation of Canadian Municipalities in 2003, where he is now responsible for managing and developing programs on climate change and energy, including the Partners for Climate Protection Program. Devin holds a Master of Applied Environmental Studies in Local Economic Development and a Bachelor of Environmental Studies in Planning from the University of Waterloo. He's a registered professional planner with the Canadian Institute of Planners and a trained facilitator. Beyond his work with FCM, he is an active member of several external working groups and regularly publishes articles on climate change and sustainable planning. In his time away from work, Devin is an avid traveler and has visited more than 40 countries. A warm welcome to you.
Thank you very much, Jimmy, and thanks to Chris for the introduction to FCM earlier. It helped shorten some of what I need to say. Thank you for having me here, and great to see such a full group of people here early in the morning. For those of you who don't know, FCM, we are an organization that represents about 2,000 local governments across Canada. We've been around since 1901 and work on both policy and program issues with the federal government and with our members, both in Canada and abroad. What I'm here to talk to you about this morning is a bit of the bigger picture of what local governments are doing on adaptation across Canada, what the state of effort is on the issue, and some specific projects that have been implemented to deal with infrastructure and climate impacts. To start things off, why this is an issue for local governments? Well, really the things that we're building are going to be around for a long time. So when we build, whether it's a building, a bridge, a subdivision, we're locking in a pattern of development and operations for 20 to 100 years. So we need to think about what climate is going to be doing over that time and hopefully adjust our thinking in the present. The best way I try to explain this nexus is through the story of 4 bridges. The first of which here is the Ville-Marie tunnel in Montreal. This is, you may have heard in the news a few years ago, that collapsed essentially due to maintenance and erosion issues. So it's the state of infrastructure and that infrastructure deficit that Chris alluded to earlier. We have to find a way to keep up with simply all the stuff that's built in the last 50 years. Adding to that, we have the need to understand local climate conditions, whether that's changes in climate or current wind, weather patterns. This is the Tacoma Narrows Bridge back in the early 20s, 30s. They didn't understand the wind systems, and it literally blew itself apart within a year of being constructed. At the other end, we have the Deschaux Bridge that's just opened up across the Mackenzie River in the Northwest Territories. So this bridge will probably be around 100 years, maybe more. So it will see a lot of changes in northern climate over that time, and what are those going to look like? When you put these ideas together, you get an example like the Bloor Street Viaduct in Toronto. This was built back in the 30s, and at the time they actually built it with 2 levels. At the time they foresaw that Toronto would eventually have a subway system. This later happened, 25 years later, and as a result of the bridge being designed the way it was, it saved the city millions of dollars in construction. So thinking ahead of how things will change with infrastructure is important as well, can save you money down the road. And it's not just climate change that we're thinking about with infrastructure, it's a whole variety of other changes that are happening out in the global world, the local world. We have, of course, there's less ability to pay for new infrastructure, there's more people using it, there's greater erosion or overload on that infrastructure. And then we add in the effects of climate change to that situation. So we're trying to help communities with that capacity to understand the issue, where they can intervene, where infrastructure can be changed. Won't spend much time on this, but essentially from a community's perspective, this is what adaptation means to them. And more importantly, it's this, adaptation is about being prepared more than it's going to be something that can actually prevent anything from happening. It's hard to know exactly what the environmental event could be. If you get enough water in a short enough amount of time, you will get flooded despite what you do, but it's what is the ounce of prevention we can implement now. So some of the bit of the state of adaptation in Canada, about a few short points. There's a lot of planning work has been done. Communities are starting to look at adaptation plans, vulnerability assessments for their broader community, where can they expect the impacts to happen. But it's fairly fragmented across communities. In most provinces there is no requirement for communities to look at this as an issue. Next slide has that as well. Yeah, some examples in Nova Scotia do actually have legislation that now requires municipalities to prepare adaptation plans and do vulnerability assessments. But for the most part, there's about 100 local governments out there that we can identify have developed an adaptation plan and are looking at that. They can be standalone, they can be integrated with other types of plans. We certainly are encouraging communities to look at mitigation and adaptation in a coordinate manner. How can actions be complementary? Where can you identify where an action to mitigate might create more vulnerability or vice versa? So these two things are interrelated. There's a few good examples of plans out there. New York City was one leading example that came out last spring because of the hurricane that went through, but also Fredericton and a few others on the West Coast have good examples of that integrated thinking. Adaptation planning comes from a variety of different disciplines as well. It's not necessarily its own distinct issue. Some, of course, are looking at risk assessment or risk management or asset management, or coming from an energy and planning lens. So we talk to communities and say, come at the issue from whatever angle resonates most with your local population and with the impact you're most dealing with. So sort of meet them where they are, and these things can all be integrated. Some provinces have requirements for asset management planning or for risk management plans. Most have risk management planning requirements, so they can build in that legislative requirement link. We've already heard about some of the impacts that are experiencing in the north. So these are facing many communities they have to deal with, whether it's permafrost melting and loss of ice roads, or shorter season for ice roads, possible invasive species as the permafrost line may move further north, or as we heard in the last presentation, the ability of the community to go out on ice and rely on the natural system that's been there for thousands of years. Adding to that, there's a number of challenges that we know of just in the north. Isolated populations, being able to access the consulting or professional expertise needed to do vulnerability assessment or adaptation planning, looking at infrastructure projects. So dealing with some of these ongoing issues at the same time, along with the actual impacts. This is a slide I steal from Engineers Canada, also identifying some of the broader barriers across the country, but rather than focus on that, I'll talk about some of what's actually happening. And this just speaks to that point. There's always a conversation and tension of if we adapt, we'll prevent something from happening. but there's lots of examples recently where if you build on a floodplain, you'll get flooded. So it is also knowing where you shouldn't be developing. So some examples of projects, and just before that, this slide comes from Engineers Canada as well, and it points to why adaptation needs to be thought of in project design. All projects are, of course, built to a certain design load, and there's a risk tolerance factored in by the engineering profession. That it gets eroded with time, we know weather and use. And of course you add to that the design load, how many cars are meant to go across the bridge, etc. But we all know more people use it than are planned, the lifespan of the infrastructure is extended, and eventually you get some sort of event happening, a storm, it comes along and now you've exceeded that load, and this is where the failure happens. So we're stretching our infrastructure and it's being forced by the environment. So these are a few projects I can point to that specifically accounted for climate impacts and integrated that into their design. Apologies up front, but there are very few examples, and unfortunately I wasn't able to find any in the north or the territories per se. If anybody has examples, I'm more than happy to hear them, and we would love to be able to integrate them. The Confederation Bridge, of course, has been around for almost 15 years now, or more. Actually adjusted its height an extra meter in design to adjust for sea level rise that would happen in the Maritimes. So factoring that into the heights, construction of infrastructure. In the city of Edmonton, one of their bridges went through the PIVC risk assessment process that Engineers Canada has developed and identified the need for greater drainage and stormwater runoff systems for the bridge to prevent further wear and tear. City of Saskatoon had problems with urban flooding, and they developed a system of super pipes, or essentially underground stormwater retention facilities. This one actually won an award a few years ago that was jointly run by FCM and IBC. We also have the Coquihalla Highway in BC. BC deals with what they call a Pineapple Express of intense and sudden storms coming up the coast. So again, looking at sudden stormwater runoff preparedness. Last year we saw obviously a number of floods and forest fires out in Alberta. Again, an example of two communities with Medicine Hat and Slave Lake. In these two communities, Medicine Hat, actually when they got funding to help with recovery, they factored in some of their own municipal dollars to adjust and build to a higher standard. So you have that opportunity to rebuild, build it to a higher standard. Whereas in the second example, actually the provincial funding would not cover costs to actually build anything except what was there before. So you have to change that thinking. Well, if what was built before failed, why are we building it again? So plan accordingly. Some municipalities are changing their planning standards and regulations. Ottawa and Barrie changing their storm events and storm flood management standards. Beaubasin out in New Brunswick looking at coastal sea level rise and storm surge, so looking at development limitations. It's been replicated in a few other communities. And this story from Edmonton highlights the need to integrate planning, design, and infrastructure. Edmonton looking at how to manage its stormwater, the cost of upgrading its pipe system, and it's just, we can't afford this, we need to look at other solutions. A few tips I often talk about, how to think about adaptation in communities. I'm not going to go through them all, but just highlight two or three. But one is obviously enforce no development areas that you've identified as particularly vulnerable and enforcing those. Looking at vulnerability assessment and risk assessment as part of a major infrastructure project due diligence process. They all have to do this, so just make that an incremental step rather than be a standout. We have to do this because of adaptation. Similar here is incorporate it into your standard planning process if you have a capital project plan or regional development plan. I think I said this before, so it's manage expectations that impacts can happen even despite the best preparedness. This is Andrea Merkel looking over the city of Dresden, which actually has a very effective flood management system, but it still failed because they got so much water. A few tools I just mentioned with the ending here. There's lots of resources out there to help communities. At FCM, one of my roles is to help connect communities with the resources that are there. So we have staff that can help make that connection. I work closely with Engineers Canada that I mentioned a few times. They have a protocol on municipal risk assessment and infrastructure. That's a valuable resource, and training sessions that they run. Canadian Institute of Planners have a suite of tools, including some case studies on northern communities and northern adaptation planning that they've developed, so that's a valuable resource. At FCM, we have created an e-learning course on adapting infrastructure to climate change that is available to communities, so you can use it at your own pace. ICLEI Local Governments for Sustainability has a training cohort program, brings in local governments and helps them develop vulnerability assessments, adaptation plans, and priority projects. And lastly, the Institute of Catastrophic Loss Reduction offers a number of case studies and resources. So, sort of in sum, looking ahead, what we can do to help local governments through this. We know there's a challenge of keeping a national focus on the North. So we need to get both the federal government and the Canadian population in general keeping a sustained interest on the value of the North and the issue it faces. Coordinated investments between agencies, whether that's the Canadian military or research and science, and engaging the local communities and the territorial governments in what needs to happen and providing them the data to make the decisions and be informed the way they need to. So that's it for me.
Thank you, Devin. And thank you to our panelists. That was all great information. It was actually really good to see. When I was doing presentations on climate in the later 2000s, 2007, 2010, certainly a lot of these initiatives weren't even off the ground yet. A lot of things are happening. So we have a mic here. I encourage you, if you have comments or if you have questions of any of our panelists, just walk up to the mic, introduce yourself, and if you're directing your question to a particular panelist, let them know, and you might have a question that's for the entire panel and they can fight over it. Okay.
Hi, my name is Mark Lucas. I'm Human Resources Manager for Raglan Mine up in northern Quebec. Specifically interested in knowing what you're doing with your Smart Ice program in terms of sharing with other communities. Every year, unfortunately, we have similar issues and problems up in northern Quebec, and I've never heard of that program being shared within for other Inuit.
I assume you mean sharing from region to region with, say, Nunatsiavut to Nunavik. I'm not sure if we have gone there yet, but within Nunatsiavut we share among our communities. But something we'd be certainly willing to look at, and we can put you in touch with our Environment Division if you want to discuss that. Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Klaus. I'm a German-born and raised engineer, and I operate a renewable energy company in southern Ontario. I would first of all like to thank the three speakers of doing a fine job showing us that we have opened Pandora's box of climate change. And you also talk a lot about adaptation, which surely is inevitable. What I'm missing, and I have specific questions in that regard, is how we actually intend to address the root cause. In Europe, there is a beautiful roadmap, an energy roadmap that all members of the European community have agreed to be 80% off carbon by 2050. I have personally visited municipalities and communities across Europe that have already undertaken that journey. I've actually visited a community that is already over 100% self-sufficient in purely renewable energies. Coming from Germany, I am very well aware of what's going on over there. So this is leading to the question of how do we intend to address the root cause? It was mentioned that we can expect 2 to 4 degrees Celsius increase. Well, that's only on a conservative trajectory. If we continue to put 2 ppm carbon into the atmosphere on an ongoing basis, as we presently do, we may actually get to the 5 to 6 degrees Celsius, which in the north may even be higher by the end of this century. So again, I come to the root cause. We can talk about adaptation as long as we want, but if we do not address the root cause, then this is going to get worse and worse. We have the technologies. So my question is, first to Minister Shiwak, where is the energy roadmap for your government, for Nunatsiavut, to get off carbon? Second, a question to Devin. What are the municipalities doing? There are some municipalities that are actually already moving in the direction of mandating. Municipalities have certain degree of control over their local building regulation and rules. Where is the requirement to build future buildings and plan for 100% autonomous, for example? So I don't want to take too much of your time. I'm getting to the root cause of it. How are we going to address the root cause of climate change? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Klaus. Much tougher question, one that I kind of had in my pocket too, but root cause and Minister Shiwak, energy roadmap.
Okay, part of my presentation was on our sustainable communities. And one thing you realize about Nunatsiavut, much of the Arctic, is that we are isolated communities. A lot of our energy, and most of our energy, all of our energy comes from diesel generating power plants. This produces a lot of pollution and puts it into the atmosphere. We have a role, I guess you can say our Sustainable Communities Initiative is our roadmap to getting to where we want to be for sustainable communities, and that includes sustainable energy, getting off the diesel generating power plants, getting to a place where we can have a more sustainable energy that doesn't hurt the environment, but also sustains the community and promotes economic development, promotes community growth, and at the end of the day, promotes healthy communities. So our Sustainable Communities Initiative includes a lot of that. So as an Inuit government in the region, that probably is the closest thing we have to a roadmap to addressing the issue of climate change, other than what we're talking about here today.
Okay. Thank you, Minister Shiwak. Mr. Causley, any appetite at the FCM to address not just adaptation, which is important, but to look at, Klaus said, more at the root cause and looking further into the future?
Mm-hmm. Certainly, and I mean, we have been working in this area, running programs with local governments since 1994 to help with mitigation and energy planning. And there are certainly leading local governments out there developing district energy systems, implementing renewable energy technologies, and working with their community to implement better building standards. One thing, I mean, how do we get to the root cause of this problem? One of the pesky things we have in Canada is this thing called confederation. So we need to get all our local governments, our provincial governments, and national government moving in the same direction. All of them have different levers they can pull, and they have to pull those in coordination. So we have some champion provinces are out there. Ontario is moving a number of green initiatives. British Columbia is certainly pushing the envelope with their Climate Action Charter and other legislation. So then we see communities like the City of Guelph or City of North Vancouver, Markham, Edmonton, that are advancing energy systems and building standards. But we need all three of them. Some municipalities can control their own building codes, some can't. That depends on whether they're a chartered city or not. But it takes the coordinating governments, and our electorate has to be more interested and see this as an issue with their elected representatives.
Okay, thank you.
Kathy Tautumi, President of Nunatsiavut Inc. We had placed the Government of Canada to court. An elder, the government was saying we have no knowledge of property rights, that we were nomads. But the elder responded, the reason why we are nomads is we move to another piece of tundra so that the lichen and the moss will grow on the area that we have left. It will grow back and feed the caribou. But coming south and looking at the World Land Use Planning, housing foundations, even right now, like Nunatsiavut government was thinking of housing, the foundations in our communities are piled up with gravel. And when you go south, you see a lot of cement all over. The earth is not breathing. So I don't see any land use planning or housing foundation how cement could be renewable. And yet countries use it all the time. They cover a lot. And in reading they talk about Amazon trees, that they breathe oxygen into the earth. But the planning that is being done using cement, concrete roads, cover thousands and thousands of earth, and it's not renewable, it's not recyclable in some parts. So my belief is if we're going to use housing foundation, we need to use what's called the Greenland Foundation in the Arctic, where the natural earth is built as a foundation for the house, because we're covering a lot of our houses with gravel, and that's not natural. We need to pursue ideas and make them active today. And coming into the cities, all I see is cement, and that's artificial environment. It scares me. Thank you. It's not a question, but an observation.
Sure. Thank you for your insight, Kathy. If there aren't any more right now, I'm not going to let Chris get off the hook with not answering anything. Chris made mention that 6 years ago, IBC made climate change being one of their priorities. I guess scientists have been yelling from the rooftops for 20 years now. Would have had some of that same data that Dr. McBean had a lot before then. Do you think that what precipitated that movement to that quick action on adaptation came because it's starting to cost money, let's do something? Is it driven by this is starting to cost, let's do something about it?
Absolutely. I mean, it would be disingenuous to suggest otherwise. It's interesting though, the industry has 4 priorities. The biggest concern that the industry has that would affect the solvency of the industry are earthquakes. And just last fall we released a major study on earthquakes. Canada is the only country that's susceptible to an earthquake on both coasts of the country. And were there to be an earthquake on the west coast, it could cost upwards, if it was modeled, it was scientifically modeled, it could cost upwards of $75 billion. And if the earthquake were to hit on the east coast in the Quebec corridor, it could cost upwards of $45 billion. So government's looking at that because everything right now is predicated on what it costs the economy. And as I alluded to in my presentation, we do know that public safety is quite concerned about the whole issue of mitigation, but not for the reasons that we would like it to be, but because of the Disaster Financial Assistance Accord, which means that when there is a natural disaster, the federal government is responsible for 90 cents on the dollar. So when you saw what took place in Alberta, what you've seen take place in Toronto this past year, the federal government is now paying out monies that they never expected. And when you're so tightly, when your fiscal flexibility is so tight, an additional $2 or $3 billion is a lot of money to have to pay out. So absolutely, it's fiscally driven. It's good public policy, but it's good economic policy.
Okay, well, thank you to our panelists. Thank you for being here this morning early. I want to present each of our panelists with this is like Price is Right, with a parting gift. So to Devin Causley and Minister Shiwak and Chris White, thank you so much for being here today.